If you took modern warfare, stripped away the drone swarms, the satellite imagery, and those, multi-billion-dollar cyber attacks.
Right, just took all of that high-tech stuff completely off the board.
Exactly. And then you forced entire nations to fight in these really tight city streets with just a gun, a bazooka, and like a single tank. I mean, who actually wins that?
It sounds absurd when you frame it like that.
It totally does. But today, we are cracking open this highly stylized, almost surreal combat record that asks exactly that question. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in this fascinating ledger known as the Chronicles of Country Ball Combat.
Yeah, specifically focusing on the events laid out in Part 11, which, if you're not familiar with the whole country ball concept, it's a very specific flavor of world building.
Oh yeah, it's wild. It's basically a universe where all these dizzying complexities of global geopolitics are just reduced to literal spherical avatars representing entire nations.
Right, it takes the sprawling, bureaucratic nightmare of modern conflict and just, well, it compresses it into these hyper-localized, intensely kinetic skirmishes.
Yeah, so it reads less like a traditional history book and much more like this brutal, raw ledger of variables. Who fought, where they fought, what weapons they brought, and who walked away.
Exactly, stripping away all the noise.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to map out the four distinct global battles that make up Part 11. We're going to analyze the recurring weaponry, examine the incredibly varied arenas, and track the ultimate outcomes.
Because beneath that cartoonish veneer of spherical nations fighting in the streets, the source material operates like a massive high-stakes strategy game.
Yeah, it has these really rigid rules and established tactical patterns. It's a completely leveled technological playing field, which lets us see the mechanics of combat with zero geopolitical noise.
And that stripping away of noise is really where the true analytical value of this text lies for you. Part 11 jumps us all across the globe, from the Pacific to Western Europe to the British Isles and finally to Eastern Europe.
Right, the combatants are constantly rotating.
They are, yeah. Yet the technological tools of war remain relentlessly, almost claustrophobically consistent. It forces us to examine the anatomy of a conflict when neither side holds a technological advantage.
Which never happens in the real world.
Right. But when everyone brings the exact same tools to the table, the deciding factors shift entirely to geography, environment, and the sheer tactical execution of the commanders on the ground.
It's the ultimate illusion of a level playing field, but it's set on wildly unlevel stages. So to understand how this works, we have to look at the baseline rules of engagement the text establishes right out of the gate.
Yeah, with the very first conflict in Part 11.
Exactly. Titled The War of the Volcano, the text immediately drops us into the Pacific theater, pitting Japan against the Philippines.
And the location specified is Manila. But the text doesn't just leave it at the city limits. It adds this highly specific geographic modifier.
Oh, right. The quote.
Yeah, the battle takes place, quote, next to the volcano.
Which is just, I have to stop here because the logistics of deploying heavy armor on the slopes of an active volcano are objectively hilarious and terrifying.
It's a logistical nightmare, yeah.
Like, think about what a tank actually requires to function. You need relatively stable ground to maneuver and to calculate firing trajectories.
And you need clean air intakes for those massive diesel or turbine engines.
Exactly. But by pinning this battle to an active geological feature, you're introducing seismic instability, unpredictable terrain, and, potentially choking clouds of volcanic ash into a mechanized firefight. It's like playing chess on a board that is actively trying to swallow the pieces.
What's fascinating here is how the text deliberately juxtaposes that chaotic, primal environmental hazard with a highly rigid mechanical arsenal. When you consider the environment, what stands out to you about staging a tank battle next to a volcano?
It just feels like nature is the third combatant in the war, right?
Exactly. And it's in this volcanic showdown that we're first introduced to the holy trinity of country ball combat. Both Japan and the Philippines deploy identical loadouts: guns, bazookas, and tanks.
It's a perfectly balanced, closed tactical loop. I kept thinking it operates exactly like a high-stakes game of rock, paper, scissors.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because you have your infantry carrying the guns, and their primary job is mobility and volume of fire, right? They're there to suppress the enemy infantry carrying the bazookas.
Right, to keep them pinned down.
Yeah. And then you have the bazookas themselves. Slow-firing, shoulder-mounted weapons designed for one specific purpose, to punch through heavy armor and take out the tanks.
And finally, the tanks, rolling in with massive kinetic energy to completely overwhelm the infantry with the guns.
Exactly. Rock, paper, scissors.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of combined arms warfare, you realize how fragile that loop is. I mean, a tank without infantry support is essentially a blind metal box waiting to be ambushed by a bazooka team.
Oh, sitting duck.
Yeah. And a bazooka team, without suppressing fire from their own infantry, well, they'll be cut down before they can even aim at the tank. The survival of each element depends entirely on the correct application of the other two.
And in Manila, despite the absolute chaos of fighting in the shadow of an active volcano, the text provides a definitive outcome. Japan successfully navigates both the tactical loop and the environmental hazard to secure a victory over the Philippines.
So they set the baseline right there.
They do. 3 specific weapons, a localized urban center, a massive environmental hazard, and a clear winner. But, the chronicles do not let us catch our breath.
No, they move right along.
The very next entry in Part 11 rips us out of that tropical volcanic landscape and drops us into a landlocked, historic European city. We shift to the Battle of Munich.
Right, so the combatants rotate again.
Yeah.
We now have Germany facing off against Austria. The theater is the dense urban sprawl of Munich.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The arsenal. I mean, we've moved to a completely different hemisphere. We're dealing with 2 entirely different nations. We're fighting in a densely packed European city rather than a volatile Pacific island. And what are they using?
Let me guess. Guns, tanks, and bazookas.
Guns, tanks, and bazookas. The exact same loadout. It begs the question, is this a universe where a universal standard for waging war has been mandated? It completely ignores differences in national economy or industrial capacity.
It does. And this raises an important question about the nature of combat in this universe. Because in our real world, asymmetric warfare is the standard. Nations leverage their unique economic or technological strengths to gain an edge.
Right, like better satellite reconnaissance or longer-range artillery.
Exactly. More advanced composite armor, things like that. But the Chronicles present a stylized reality where that asymmetry simply doesn't exist. Both Germany and Austria crossed the city limits of Munich wielding the exact same rock, paper, and scissors.
Which totally changes how you have to fight. Fighting on the slopes of a volcano is about surviving the environment. Fighting in Munich is a masterclass in urban tactical doctrine.
That's a completely different puzzle.
Yeah, because a city street is what military strategists call a fatal funnel. If you roll a tank down a narrow Munich avenue, its turret might not even have the clearance to traverse and aim properly.
Furthermore, the verticality of an urban environment completely flips the advantage to the bazooka. Suddenly, the threat isn't just in front of the tank.
No, it's looking down from a 3rd-story window.
Exactly. The buildings themselves become fortified bunkers, sniper nests, and ambush points. When the technological variables are completely neutralized, when neither side has a better tank or a faster gun, the defining variable becomes the mastery of that specific urban geometry.
So it comes down to sheer granular execution. Who controls the intersections? Which infantry unit better screens their armor from those windows? Who utilizes the rubble for cover more effectively?
You're relying entirely on the tactical acumen of the commanders on the ground.
Yeah. And in this scenario, fighting in a major Bavarian hub, the text gives us another definitive data point. Germany wins the war against Austria in Munich.
And that German victory in Munich solidifies the baseline we established in Manila. It proves the rule of this universe. The geography shifts wildly, the spherical national combatants change, but the triad of weapons and the fundamental concept of a clear, decisive victor remain absolute constants.
They lull you into a false sense of analytical security. You think you understand the physics of this world.
Right, you think you have the formula figured out.
Which is exactly why the 3rd entry in Part 11 is such a massive structural shock to the system. Just as you are getting comfortable mapping out the geometry of bazookas, guns, and tanks, the Chronicles completely break their own rules. We move to the Irish conflict.
The theater shifts to the city of Dublin, and the combatants are the United Kingdom engaging Ireland.
And the arsenal. They are bringing guns, tanks, bazookas, AND airplanes.
Yeah, that's a huge shift.
Suddenly, the sky is no longer just a ceiling, it is an active vector of attack. So what does this all mean?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it means the entire paradigm of combat we've spent the first half of this text dissecting has just been violently rendered obsolete.
Obsolete, yeah.
The addition of air superiority is not just adding a fourth weapon to the list. It represents a fundamental, geometric escalation of warfare. You are no longer fighting in a two-dimensional plane, worrying about what is around the next street corner in Munich or over the next ridge in Manila.
It shatters that rock, paper, scissors loop entirely. Just put yourself in the boots of a tank commander in Dublin. Tanks are heavily armored on the front and sides to deflect ground-based kinetic impacts, right?
Right, but their top armor is notoriously thin.
Exactly. If an airplane drops munitions from above, the tank is a sitting duck. And what about the bazookas? A bazooka is an unguided, shoulder-fired rocket meant to hit a massive, slow-moving steel box on the ground.
It has absolutely zero utility against a fast-moving aircraft.
None. The player who brought the airplane just brought a laser pointer to a knife fight.
And the tactical implications ripple through every single layer of the battlefield. The presence of hostile aircraft forces ground units to drastically alter their behavior. Do the tanks have to hide inside the urban infrastructure of Dublin, rendering their mobility useless?
Yeah, or does the infantry have to abandon their suppression roles just to survive the strafing runs?
Exactly. The text doesn't explicitly outline the new tactical doctrine, but the mere inclusion of airplanes forces us to imagine a completely different, vastly more destructive scale of conflict.
But you know, the truly brilliant part of the Irish conflict isn't even the introduction of the airplanes. It is the narrative silence that follows it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in Manila, Japan won. In Munich, Germany won. The ledger was clean. But in Dublin, the text simply cuts to black. We are told who is fighting, where they are fighting, and this massive technological escalation of how they're fighting. But the victor is entirely unstated.
And that omission is the most powerful rhetorical device in Part 11. By deliberately leaving the outcome in Dublin blank, the authors of the Chronicles are communicating a profound truth about technological disruption.
That the math is broken now.
Right. In Manila and Munich, we understood the math. We understood how the triad of weapons interacted. But by injecting air power into the equation, the authors are signaling that the old mathematical formulas no longer apply.
The conflict becomes too chaotic to simply wrap up with a neat, one-sentence declaration of victory. The introduction of paradigm-shifting technology makes the outcome inherently unpredictable.
Did the airplane secure a swift, overwhelming victory for whoever possessed them? Or did they just create a brand new, terrifying kind of stalemate where ground forces were pinned down and cities were levels from above? We don't know.
We don't. The silence speaks volumes about the disruptive power of that technology. It leaves you with a profound sense of unresolved tension, a feeling that the very fabric of this combat universe has been torn open.
Which really serves to make the final battle of Part 11 feel almost like a jarring return to brutal normalcy.
It really is a massive snapback to reality, because after that terrifying aerial escalation in Dublin, the final battle brings the combat firmly back down to the mud and the concrete. We move to the battle for Kiev.
The combatants here are Ukraine defending against Belarus. The location is the city of Kyiv.
And the arsenal. We are back to the Holy Trinity. Guns, bazookas, and tanks, the airplanes have completely vanished from the text.
The rules of engagement have abruptly regressed to the baseline established in the Pacific and Central Europe.
It's such a sharp pivot that it forces you to look at the macro structure of this world. Like, why the sudden regression? Did the airspace over Kiev not support the kind of aerial warfare we just witnessed in Dublin? Or is this an issue of technological localization?
This raises an important question regarding technological proliferation within the Country Bowl universe. Just because a breakthrough piece of military technology exists in the British Isles theater doesn't mean it has been exported, successfully adopted, or even independently developed in the Eastern European theater.
Yeah, it's like hitting a tech tree bottleneck. The UK and Ireland might be fighting a modern multi-domain war, while Ukraine and Belarus are still locked in a traditional heavy metal ground war.
Exactly. It suggests that technological advancement in this world is highly guarded, or perhaps strictly limited by regional industrial capacities that the text otherwise ignores.
And in the context of that traditional symmetrical ground war, the familiar, brutal rules of physics apply once again. The text abandons the ambiguity of Dublin and provides a clear, unambiguous outcome.
Ukraine, defending their home city of Kiev with the standard baseline arsenal, emerges victorious against Belarus.
It is a definitive, grounded victory. There's a massive psychological and tactical advantage to defending your own home turf when the weapons are identical. You know the streets, you know the sightlines, you know exactly where a bazooka team can inflict the most damage on an incoming column of armor.
And Ukraine leverages that home turf advantage to win in Kyiv. The inclusion of this final battle brings Part 11 to a decisive close,
Yeah, it really rounds it out.
placing it immediately following the unresolved chaos of Dublin reinforces a core truth about this universe. The absolute foundation of this combat relies on tanks, bazookas, and guns. The planes are a terrifying flash of lightning, but the tanks are the thunder that actually shapes the landscape and definitively decides borders.
They really are the heavy metal bread and butter of country ball warfare. When you zoom out and look at the journey Part 11 just took us on, it's incredible how much strategic depth is hidden inside such a sparse, stylized text.
It really is.
By standardizing the rules of engagement, by stripping these conflicts down to just their geographic locations, their rigid loadouts, and their outcomes, we are able to clearly track the evolution and the disruption of combat.
It's a rigorous exercise in isolating variables.
Yeah.
If we had not spent the time establishing the absolute norm in the volcanic ash of Manila and the urban density of Munich, the sudden arrival of airplanes in Ireland would not have carried nearly the same narrative or tactical weight.
Oh, not at all.
The baseline must exist so we can truly comprehend the shockwave of the exception.
Exactly. We watched Japan navigate the chaos of an active volcano to prove the triad works. We watched Germany execute flawless urban tactics in Munich to prove the triad is standardized.
And then we watched the triad completely shatter under the weight of air power in Dublin.
Yeah, and finally, we watched Ukraine pick up the pieces of the triad to defend Kyiv. It's a masterclass in distilled military strategy. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to pull us back to that massive, glaring hole in the center of the text.
Ah, the unresolved skies over Dublin.
Yes. I want to leave you with a final puzzle to mull over. We spent a lot of time today exploring how perfectly balanced the gun, bazooka, and tank triangle really is. Every weapon has a counter, every tactic has a flaw. Right. But since the Chronicles never reveal the ultimate winner of the UK versus Ireland conflict, well, how long do you think it took for the ground forces to adapt to the airplanes?
That's the real question.
Did they invent new ways to use the bazookas, or did the side with the planes simply bomb the traditional triad out of existence? Looking at this beautifully distilled, mathematically rigid world of combat, who do you think actually walked away victorious from the smoke and rubble of Dublin?